Alright everybody, so we're back. It's Tuesday, like we said before. Overnighted some bearings from King yesterday, and that fixed my main bearing issue. So, when we left off, the mains were a little bit loose on the oil clearance from what I like. The issue is that the GT500 aluminum block main bearing set does not come undersized. So, the 5.4 iron block bearings are all the same, except for the first one. So, what I did was I overnighted a set of 026s. 026 is 1 thou tighter, and we used the other 9. Now, if you remember in the first video, I said I wanted to get a little bit of extra oil clearance on the front main. That's pretty typical for big blower applications. And so what I did was I was expecting about half a thou larger, and with the standard shell on the block side, that's what we want, but it only came out about 3/10, but that's fine. 3/10 is fine. So number 1 main is about 3/10 looser, and that is due to me running a standard bearing on the upper portion, which is the block side. Everything else is a 026, and I think the other 4 within a thou or so. Now what we're going to do is go over installing the rotating assembly. We'll start with the crank, then rods and pistons. I'm going to go over setting the thrust. That's something very important to know what to do. And that's about it. So let's get going. Alright, so I'm just going to put my 4 second rings in for this bank. And then I will use my little cheapo depot squaring fixture. And I'm just going to get a preliminary reading. They should all be about the same. Depending on the bore size, some of them will butt together. So that's kind of hard. You got to take a little bit off to get a preliminary reading. Alright, that's 15 there. It's a little bit loose for 15. A little bit loose. Alright, so that one's 15 as well. Alright, this is my loosest one, so I'm going to do this one first. Make sure everything's straight here. This one came about 19. I'm shooting for 22 on the top, 24 on the second. So 5 thou will get us to 24. It's my handy dandy ring filer made by ABS. It does have a dial indicator on it, which is nice. However, the dial indicator is not super duper accurate, so, and I will not do it I will not measure anything under around 3 thou. Just kind of do that by feel, because you will take off too much. So I need 5. That was about 3.5. And we're creeping up on it, because you can't add material. That was 22. 23 is nice. Just a little resistance, so we should be perfect here. 24. Boom. So once I'm done, I will, I actually set the ring on top of the piston, that way I don't get confused. Now, this thing does have a little wheel for deburring the edge of the ring, but it doesn't, it kind of boogers it up, and I don't really care for that, so you can see the gap right there. Nice and square. So all I do is the side that I had to grind on, which is this side, and this diamond file. It's very, very, very fine. And just put a little chamfer there, little chamfer there, and then I hit the inside here. The inside is so any of the burrs don't grab the piston and hurt the ring rotation. We're good to go. Alright, we got all the rings filed. Now I'm going to separate the rods, put the bullets to the side, and then we will put the pistons on the rods. Alright, so now we got all the rod caps separated from the main portion of the rod. I'm going to put the wrist pin clips in one side. Then we're going to hang the rods on the pistons, and then you will get to see why my numbers are the way they are. Got all one side of the wrist pin clips in. We're going to lube the other side with more of this Lucas oil. Dirty grease. Wrist pin. That started. Move the rod bushing. Okay, and so how I have this set up is the numbers are here, so they're facing you, and so is the blue portion here. And that way you will never put the rod on in the wrong orientation. Alright, so pistons are on the rods. All the numbers are facing us. And now we are going to put on the piston rings. So, a few things to note. Top ring. Now, some piston rings will be numbered and some, or they will have a dot indicating that it's going up. For instance, the second ring does. I'm not sure if you can see the dot right there.
Yep.
Okay. If that second ring did not have a dot, first clue is that it's cast iron. Top ring is steel. This is obviously the second ring. Now if you wanted to know which way it goes and it didn't have the dot, look at it. We know that the cast iron ring is the second one. It has a bevel. That bevel points down. The top ring has a bevel, but on the top side. That bevel points up, always. Now, if you're watching this and you're like, oh my gosh, I put it together wrong. Well, don't worry. First engine I built probably 12 years ago, I had the second ring upside down, and guess what? It had 3 owners and had like 80,000 miles when the third owner brought it to me, and it's still running great. So, it's not the end of the world. Alright, and then now we're going to do piston ring orientation. So the best thing to do is copy Total Seal. Their instruction booklet is perfect. So, front of the engine, top ring, and oil expander. Oil scraper, second ring. If you do that, you will never have a problem. You should always be using a piston ring pliers for at least the top 2 rings. Oil you can do by hand. Alright, so here we go. 45-degree angle. Now one thing to make sure is that you don't pinch the oil ring, because the expander does have a groove for the scraper to sit in. And I have seen more people try to slam pistons in cylinder bores, and these thinner rings will kind of fold over, and if you, that oil scraper might be thin, but it's stainless steel and it will tear a cylinder up if it rolls. So another good indicator here of my paint. I know, I don't even have to look at the piston. I know that for these first 4, my second ring gap doesn't have any paint. My top ring does. Oops. Number two is going to be fast. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is, before I put the crankshaft in here, before I lube the bearings, I am literally just going to wipe them down. I have some WD-40 on a lint-free cloth, and just make sure there's no contaminants on the surface of the bearing. And I'm going to do the same to the cap side. Put the thrust washers in. This uses 3-piece thrust washers. So if you want to see here, this goes on the cap on the back, and these two go on the block. For anyone wondering, this side is going to go towards the crankshaft. This side is going to go towards the block. Just put just a little bit of lube there. Alright. Push the crank back. Now I'm stuck. There we go. Just slide it in. Then you can see the relief between those two. Can you see that? That's like the ledge where the other one's going to sit. Slide that in there. And just rotate. Crank is the easiest way to get it in there. Okay, that portion is good. I will put number 5 on first, but number 5 is going to be the last one that we torque down, and that's going to be because we're going to set the thrust clearance. Just like that. Just get rid of the cap. Alright. Alright, we are good there. And we will do the other 4. Alright, so what I'm doing now is just setting all my, making sure all my nuts sit flush with the top of the stud. I really don't like seeing engines where nothing looks like it matches. And also, so a lot of times when you remove the nut, when you're blueprinting, it'll pull the stud back out just a little bit. So I'm literally just kind of snugging them up with my hand, making sure they're all the same, so when I torque them, they're all going to look the same. Alright, now we're going to torque the main caps, numbers 1 through 4. We're not doing the side bolts yet. Then I will set the thrust. I will show you how to do that, and then we put the side bolts in. We'll start 30 pounds right in the middle. We'll go 30 and then 60. Alright, so I've torqued mains 1 through 4. I'm just going to go ahead and just mark that I did that real quick. Some people like to mark the bolt or the nut. I'm not going to do that when there's ARP lube everywhere, because that ruins my marker, so I just put dots like this. Especially good if there's a phone call or something and I get interrupted, I know where I'm at. Alright, so setting the thrust. Thrust bearing is very important. The reason is that, well, it's 2 pieces, so you want them to be lined up with each other so you don't have premature wear on either the block side or the cap side. Back, years ago, you'd see a lot of guys wiping these out or doing all these conversions when, torque converter technology wasn't as good. But regardless, if a torque converter is ballooning or you're just, slamming the clutch during gear shifts, anytime there's pressure on the back of the crankshaft, it's going to be pushing it forward. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about that. So what we're wanting to do is make sure that with the thrust bearings lined up, or with the thrust bearings installed, the cap and the block side line up. So how we do that is we're just simply going to use the rear flange of the crankshaft to pull the cap forward. Now, first we have to push the cap back, because if it was already too forward enough, then you would get premature wear on the block side. If it's too far back, you're gonna get premature wear on the cap side. So you can pry it off one of these other mains, or what I do, take a rubber mallet and you're just gonna tap it in the front. Just tap it back. Now, with your torque wrench in your hand, what you can do, rotate this over, and we're just going to put a little bit of forward pressure using number 4 main cap, and this counterweight, pull it forward. Oh, that's not working. Alright, we're going to number 3 here. It's a little bit more room. You don't have to pull very hard, just a little bit of positive pressure will pull it even with one another. And now to verify this is good, we will check the crankshaft in play. I don't really know what the factory spec is. I think it's like 6 to 12, but I would say the tolerances that I see are just a little bit tighter. Typically see anywhere between 8 and 11. If you have less than 6 though, you probably didn't set the thrusts correctly. So, very, very simple. Oh, that's what I'm really looking for. You're just gonna read the difference here. So, here. We'll go over here. Alright, so about 63 and a half. And here we're about 54 and a half. About 54. That's 9 thousandths. Crankshaft in play, I would say that is perfect. Perfect as perfect gets. Alright, so also where we left off last time, we had got the piston rings on the rod, so rod bearings are still in there from blueprinting. I'm simply just going to wipe these down just like we did with the mains here. And then we'll lube them up, and then we're going to put some pistons in.
Oof.
You got to glop it on a little bit. It doesn't like to stick when you put a little WD-40 on. For those of you wondering what side bolts the GT500 engine takes, they take a 9mm side bolt that is the same as the WAP or the 3-valve block, torques to 45 foot-pounds. We have a 5.4 iron block. It's going to take a 9mm side bolt as well, but it's going to be longer. Okay, here's side bolt part numbers. Texid block, 156, 5001. This block, the WAP aluminum block, the 99 Texid without the jack screws, all of those blocks, 156, 5002. Let's see what the other ones are. Romeo is a 156, 5201. And the 5.4 iron block, which is a 9mm, is 156, 5202. I'm missing one, the boss block. 156, 5203, I believe.
Since everyone loved it in the teardown video, he called all the ARP part numbers out of his head.
We can do bearings too.
Yeah, he doesn't have a cheat sheet. There's no cheat sheets here. It's all in the brain.
Alright, we got the side bolts torqued up, spinning nice and smooth. Obviously there's some assembly loop, so you're going to have some resistance. Now, what I have done in the past, you put a little WD-40 down these holes and it makes a little bit of a layer. between the crankshaft and the assembly lube, and then it'll spin like butter. But this is good enough, and we are going to throw some rods and pistons in. Now, my one dilemma is that the bore size that we're using, I don't have a tapered, or I didn't have an ARP tapered compressor for, and I preach that all the time. So I have a adjusted one from Total Sale because ARPs are on big back order right now. So we're gonna give that one a shot. I hope it works as good as the other ARP ones. And another thing I do, this might look a little ghetto, this is one of my little bins, but I do not use any assembly lube on the skirts. Straight WD-40 only, that's how I've always done it. Never have ring sealing problems. Customers' engines do not smoke. So that has been working for me. Some people may not agree with that, but that's how we're doing it.
I don't want a smoky engine.
No.
Like some other YouTubers.
Just get the skirt. Nice and liberal. Get the rings. This one adjusts to a 3680 bore, and that is my final bore, so we're gonna just adjust it to that and see how it works, because I haven't tested this. It's a little shallower than the ARP ones. Well, it seems to be okay though. Alright, we're gonna give her a shot. Piston numero uno. Boom. I'll loosen it up just a tad. That was a tad tight, but I see a lot of people using like piston hammers and stuff to install pistons. Unless you have a really thick ring pack, like I'm talking big block, 1/16, 1/16, 3/16, and you have a ton of ring resistance, that should be the only time that you need it. On a mod motor, you should never need it. ARP tapered ring compressor, just like you saw me, push it down with your thumbs. If you can't get it down with your thumbs, something's wrong. Same thing we showed you before, just tap the rod in place. You do not want to be pulling it together with the connecting rod bolts. We're going to re-lube the threads just a little bit and under the head. Alright, and we are just going to snug up for later, because after we get all the rods and pistons in, we're going to go back, loosen them all up, and then we are going to use this handy dandy gauge to do the rod bolt stretch, which I feel is like one of the more important parts of building an engine. Every rod bolt should be measured. Alright, we're just spinning the first one over, just make sure everything's smooth. Sounds good. And we're ready for the next one. All right, number 2 coming in. Alright, last one. Alright, so we got all the pistons and rods in. Everything is snug. Now we're going to flip it over, and I loosen these 4 at a time. So 4 at a time. We're going to check one, stretch it. If it's good, mark it, move on to the next one. And earlier, well, the other day when we were filming, and I was so picky about like what part of the rod gets labeled and everything, that's so you can see the numbers out here. So if you can't see the number, then you know you're wrong. It's just like a triple check. So we'll get started here, and like I said before, this is something that's very important. The reasoning for the torque angle method, so we are using the torque angle method. These call for 30 pounds initially, and then 60 degrees. What I encourage everybody to do is creep up on it. Check it in a rod vise. Put your 30 pounds, go to 55 degrees. See what it reads. If that's not enough, go to 56. I set my gauge at 57 most of the time because I go over 1. And 58 is typically dead on the money. If it's not, we can loosen, re-lube, and re-torque. So the reason you want to use the torque angle method is because it's more consistent. 30 pounds is very consistent. You don't have a ton of friction there. It doesn't matter if what lube I'm using, if I torqued it, if Andrew torqued it, if Joe Schmo down the street torqued it. It does not matter. It's going to be fairly close. But once you get into the kind of torque that's needed for the rod bolt clamping force, you know, on a 7/16 bolt, it could be anywhere 85 to 100 pounds. So that is going to have a ton of differences. How much lube is up under the head? What kind of lubricant is it? All that kind of stuff comes into play. When you do the torque angle method, it's much more consistent. And the stretch of the bolt will tell you that. All right. So we're going to put our gauge on here first. Set it to 0. Kind of wiggle it around, make sure it's still at 0. See that good? This thing is very picky, so I'm gonna set the angle on it. It needs to be dead. Just wait for it. Okay, it's at 57. We're at 30 there. Here we go. I'm gonna need some stretch. All right, there's our 30 pounds and 57 degrees. All right. And as you can see, so we have 5 and 5.5, 6. So we're right between 6 and 6.5. That is perfect. Calls between 6 and 64 10,000ths. So that is where we are at. We're in that window, and we can move on. A marker here. Okay, so one thing I want to touch on here is in the instance that you're not getting the right results. You're not getting the right results if you're not getting enough rod bolt stretch, then add a degree at a time. Creep up on it. If you happen to go over your number, so like I said before, this is between 6 and 6.4 thousandths is the rod bolt stretch that is recommended by the manufacturer. That goes for both K1 and Molnar rods with this rod bolt in it. 7/16 ARP 2000. Say you go and something slips and you go to 7. Undo the bolt, make sure it goes back to 0. If it doesn't go back to 0, throw the bolt away, order a new bolt. If you're ever in an instance where you think the bolt's just not feeling right, loosen it up and recheck. If it doesn't go back to 0, you've permanently stretched the bolt and is not usable. I would say, shoot, I've probably thrown 3 away in the last 5 years. So it's not something very common, but don't just let it ride. It will come apart. Under the 6.5 marks. We're good there. All rods have been set to the proper stretch, so we're not going to have any issues there. The last thing I'm going to do here with the crankshaft is we've already measured the end plate, so we're just going to measure the rod side clearance. I would say typical rod side clearance is anywhere from 12 to 15 or so. So I'll start with my feeler gauge there and at 12 and see where it's at. Okay, that's 12. 12 feels pretty good. Let's see if you can squeeze a 13 in there. I don't think so. I think 12 is going to be on the money. Yep, 13 doesn't want to go. Rod side clearance for number 1 and number 5 is 12. It's 12, nice and snug. I'd say probably not going to want a 13 either, but we will try. 13 barely goes in. I'm still going to say that rod side clearance is 12. That's 13. Feels pretty, sorry, that's 12. That feels pretty snug like the other ones did. We'll try 13. And if not, that's where we're at. Nope, 13 does not want to go. 12,000 side clearance. Anything 10 to 20 is good. I prefer around 14 to 15, but that's plenty right there, and I'm really happy with how everything went together. Next one will be installation of the heads. Camshaft degree. Oof. And then buttoning up this long block.
And pretty close, man.
We are very close. Besides the, main bearing clearance issue, we didn't really have any other hiccups. Everything went together very smooth, and the main bearing thing is great because it shows exactly why you need to blueprint. Don't use plastic gauge, micrometer and a dial bore, and that's about it.